What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Dose Chais. My name's Efren, and with me always is my trusty co-host, Coop.
What's happening?
It's been a while since we've done this. You know, life just keeps us busy and stuff with that way. But Coop wanted to get together with it being a holiday break and said, hey, let's do another podcast. I said, let's do it. He had a great topic, so I'm going to let him introduce the topic to us.
No, Efren's been far too nice, guys. This is my fault that we've had this blank period.
No, look.
And it's the humility and the embarrassment of the Chicago Bears. So Efren and I came into the season, I'm talking Super Bowl, and here we are, a top 10 pick again. So I take all the blame. And we thought we'd take this episode to talk about 2024 as we wrap up this year. And it's so weird as you age versus youth. When I was young, I felt like every year flew by. And I feel like 2024 has been 5 or 6 years in 1 year.
You think it's been longer than COVID year?
Oh, my goodness gracious. I feel like, this year, I can't even remember January and February. Well, I can remember COVID year in detail.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, there was a January? Like, I can't remember anything that happened in the beginning of this year. But the last 4 or 5 months, between the election cycle, terrible NFL season, the excitement of college football playoffs, presidential election, governmental shutdown, and conversations about shutdown. I feel like these last 4 months, super slow.
Yeah, but I think it just depends on with where you are, because I know with me being an employee of the government, the shutdown's always, that's like death in Texas. That's always going to happen. So they always tend to do it, so it always tends to come up with me. But I will agree, it does seem like, I remember one of the podcasts we did, we were like 100 days out from when Kamala was introducing herself to run for the presidency, to now it seems like that was years ago when she introduced herself in the summertime that she was coming out.
Who's Kamala Harris again?
I know, really. So now it's just after the election, she's kind of sort of faded into the background. You don't even hear her or even have seen her out doing any kind of stuff and what, maybe just winding down into the presidency. But it is weird how that seems years ago, but it was just 5 months ago, if that. No, 3 months.
Yesterday when I told my kids that Jimmy Carter died, they're like, didn't he die earlier this year? And it almost felt like a Mandela effect, where for years I used to do a trivia question to students in class, and I say, what year did Nelson Mandela die? I had to stop doing it because students started to respond, who's Nelson Mandela? Which, again, as a history teacher, you always wonder what parts of world history gets covered. In the later parts of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century, historians have had a hard time. How do you teach those? Because to us, one event that we will never forget is 9/11.
True.
And so many kids today, when we talk about September 11th being a day of significance day, students are like, can you remind me what it is? And so it's just one of those things that make you go, wow, the way we view and see history when we're a major part of it versus people who weren't here yet. Pearl Harbor. I always stop and reflect on Pearl Harbor Day because I think it's such a monumental changing of the world. But Pearl Harbor is a military base, so in some ways you can understand a military base being hit versus the World Trade Center, which is an economic base for the whole world at the time, being hit and being completely and utterly surprised at that style of attack.
So because of the way that the world is and controversies, the ebb and flow of life that way, is it recency bias that hurts sometimes? People only reliving what's recency to them?
Or maybe it's more. Maybe mentally we've changed. So I love the word grit and that idea of hard work. And man, me and my wife have this ongoing conversation about paid time off. So I'm a collector, right?
Me too.
So I want to collect as much paid time off as I can. But my wife is always like, is that healthy? Is it healthy to have that mindset of, I'm going to work every single day and I'm not going to take a break? So some people's ideas when 9/11 happened, what was the first big thought? Let's raise the buildings back. Let's show the terrorists we can't be defeated. So let's put and the footprint is still there today. There's one trade center now. but we put that building back up, and we tried to put it up as quick as possible to show that the American spirit can't be defeated.
Oh yeah, and then like was it the height of 1,776 feet or something?
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful gesture, but then there are other people saying, like, maybe we should have stopped and gave it more reference. Like, we should have stopped and said, like, when these statues fell, 3,000 people died. And we should stop and remember these people and really grieve them. Maybe this land should be made into a public cemetery or a monument saying, like, the economic power base that we just lost 3,000 lives. And these 3,000 lives are more important than that commercial center. So instead, I mean, so when you think about it that way, then you think about the Arizona, Pearl Harbor.
Oh yeah, because they never made an attempt to raise it because of the reverence of, lives being lost there, and it was their last burial site or something that way.
Some of those people have families, DNA, because we wanted to say for sure my son was here. Other people have gone in and they found ways to respectfully take people out of there and bury them. So there has been ways to honor it, but at the same time, Pearl Harbor built a monument around it, but they still remain there.
So do you think it has, and this is an odd way to phrase it, do you think it has more to do with what is important to society as a whole? Because like I know the couple of times I've been to the Alamo, you see it in its grandeur on TV and movies, and just like, this is an amazing place with where, the Spanish-American War, with where they had their, they held back the invading armies of Mexico and stuff with this way, and they won a great battle. But it's like a little postage stamp. It's right in the middle of like a retail center in San Antonio area. So it doesn't hold the grandeur that, it did back in the day that you think it would, because it was a greater thing. And maybe that's what they're trying to do, because it's a twofold of, I agree with you. I think you keep the sites reverence and peaceful and as a remembrance and a memorial to the people who lost their lives. Civil War, monuments the same way and stuff. And even Shanksville in Pennsylvania, they didn't build any big, big retail stuff. It's just memorials and things with that way. But I think because the flip side of the coin is, if you leave it a big hole there, however you want to describe it there, it's going to show that they won, because we didn't rebuild back that Titan Center, that area of construction, that area of retail or business center, whatever it is, was there. You leave it whole. Does it leave a glaring representation of what was always there? I mean, you can do both ways. You can just move that building to a different site somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think like it's always two ones that stick out to me the most are when you go to Boston and you're walking through downtown area of Boston and you see the graveyards every once in a while, and they'll be like a founding father is buried here, but then right next to it is like Cheers bar or a random Dunkin' Donuts. So it's like, oh man, this is weirdly placed. But then you go to Atlanta and you go to the King Center, where you have the Martin Luther King Center, and right next to it is this neighborhood where they preserved like blocks of homes and basically bought the property and reserved it in that condition and state. So you can go sit on his stoop, and I don't think you can enter the home anymore. I think they sealed it off.
Yeah.
But you get to go walk where Martin Luther King walked. And it's like that moment is frozen in time.
So do you think it's more on what doesn't want to be forgotten? Is that why they make more of a point to memorialize it?
Yeah, I mean, because there's an argument about the King Center saying, like, wouldn't it be better to have live people living in that community right next to the King Center, so then their children can have access to it as often if they wanted to. And there's a point to that too, but then at the same time, it's like when you take a bus load of kids and you say, here's the building, but the neighborhood is also part of this monument, so you can walk through and touch what he touched. I get both sides of the argument, but I think that's history, right? Where you always, like, if you grew up reading the Bible, every time God and the Israelites had a covenant, they would build a monument to mark it.
Yeah.
And you just think there's a significance saying, like, this moment is so important that we're just not going to let it pass by without marking and saying, this place at this time, there was this thing that happened and occurred that is so important that we might build around these monuments, but these monuments will never
Oh
come
yeah,
down.
100%. I mean, I agree with 100%, and that makes the most sense because I mean, with you making the comment about founding fathers and stuff. When I was in New York City, I remember going by and seeing the grave of Alexander Hamilton. That's big in now societal life with the play Hamilton and stuff. That's brought great awareness and appreciation for all those founding fathers. But it is weird. It's just in like the random part of like Manhattan.
Yeah.
It's like a couple blocks from Wall Street. And it's just like, well, this is not as reverent as what it needs it to be and stuff. And I think if it means different things to different people, they make it more of an effort to make it more not forgotten and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's always who does it belong to? Because it's like the federal government has the authority to buy up lands to say this land is now sacred to the country. But then commercial value. Mm-hmm. So if you happen to put that in an area where you're like, man, we need more homes, and it's kind of sad when you see a monument shifted or moved to another area because they needed to make room. And that probably happens a lot more than people think. I mean, but being a kid in Chicago, though, like when you go to the DeSable Museum and you see the statue of DeSable, it's like, this is cool. And I'd even say one of the cooler things about D.C., D.C. has all those cool monuments, but Washington, and you know that no building is taller. Mm-hmm. So when you go there and you look up and you see the Washington Monument and you see the height and you go, man, in other big cities, buildings are much taller. But in this place, this is what they said and this is what they stuck to. You kind of respect that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean it's weird how different regions of the world have different things. I know, like, family being from Mexico, a lot of those old Mayan temples and things are still the only things that are right there in the land that they have. They don't have other commercial stuff built out around it because it's history that they want to preserve for future generations. Now it's up to us who are living it now to pass that along to our kids and family so they know about it that way. But it is interesting how, I remember that phrase of everybody, life before 9/11 and life after. That was a big deal when it happened with us because we're old enough to remember it happening. But that phrase is no longer part of the lexicon because it just has fallen to the wayside. It's not as, prior to September 11th, we could do this, we could do that, was a big deal. And now it's just, not now being 23 years removed now from that happening and stuff.
And we're still seeing the dominoes. So like Syria, Bashar Assad falls less than a month ago. And you can connect Syria to ISIS to Iraq and the chaos of post 9/11. Mm-hmm. So again, I mean, Al-Qaeda still exists.
Oh, yeah.
ISIS still exists. Mm-hmm. The Kurds all still exist. All these groups have been highlighted because of things that happened during 9/11. And I mean, you can even argue to a point, because history is always like this, what leads to this, what leads to this, but George W. Bush and Colin Powell as Secretary of State presents a case toward to the UN to go into Iraq. Mm-hmm. UN rejects them. So then we go on with the coalition of the willing. And that invasion of Iraq is some of the justification that Putin gives to go into Ukraine and potentially down the road Xi Jinping into Taiwan or Chinese Taipei, because I don't want to offend anybody. But yeah, it's like all those little strings, and that's how history works. It's like, how do they connect? I mean, Jimmy Carter passed away, and some people immediately then say Jimmy Carter boycotted the '80 Olympics because Russia goes into Afghanistan might be the first push of that, because then Afghanistan glows up and then Charlie Wilson and America being involved through the CIA goes in over there with funds and weapons and anti-helicopter rounds and creates a group, Al-Qaeda, who down the road becomes our biggest enemy. So it's interesting how they all connect.
It is interesting. I always think of that phrase when somebody does something that's good for them but bad for somebody else, and then they use it against them. It's like, well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's like, it's okay when we use those rules, like when George W. did and Colin Powell of UN rejected it. Well, they got coalition of the willing. They go in and they didn't find anything, but yet current day world leaders try the exact same thing. Well, whoa, you can't do that. I was like, well, wait a minute. It was good for you guys in 2003. Now, why is it bad? Is it because you're not doing it? It's not your idea. Is that why it makes it bad? But
this is America post World War II, right? Like I don't think that at any point an American president was thinking, if we make this decision, we become the parents of the world. But in a lot of ways, being a sole superpower, it's a give and a take. And right now, people say, who's our biggest adversary? And automatically people want to say Russia. But a lot of people will say China. And China's like the new kid, and America's the old kid. But in the whole view of world history, America's still the young kid on the block. And
Oh, yeah.
I mean, China has been on this world stage, and in some ways, Russia forever. And it's like, yeah, I mean, the burden of being in that superpower, aka parent role, and saying, I'm going to intervene here and I'm going to intervene here, but I'm not going to intervene here, does set you up in a place where when somebody said, why did you intervene here and not here? And then now I have a little bit of power and authority and I want to intervene too. My justification doesn't have to be clear because yours wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense because that's one of those things that we've always been the police of the world. We've always been the one that something goes awry. Okay, the United States, they'll step in and they'll handle it. They'll be the peacekeeper or the, they'll stand on the moral side, whatever that is, and help remedy that. But at some point, we need to let the world do its own thing, not do it to a detriment. Obviously they need to work out stuff in their own world sections, countries, or whatever that way, and not let it always be that America dominates or gets in there that way. But they try to do it because it's American values would say this, or it would, hurt the American way of life if we let this happen and stuff with that way. So I get the domino reference and stuff with that way, but at some point, can I just let them walk away and just, you know what, you guys decide it, and if you need some help, then we'll step in to help you that way or give you some advice and not send anything. Because, they can send money or send old, militia or old munitions and things to a country, let them do it that way. And, well, hey, we're out of it that way. Well, not really if we're giving money or giving old munitions that we no longer need or selling them for a discounted rate. You're still affecting the scale. You're not doing it with a thumb, but you're doing it with a pinky.
Well, they used to use this phrase, American interests are involved. And a lot of times that means American business.
Oh, yeah.
So when we see the Middle East and oil, as American, we think of American interests, and we automatically think of Exxon and Texaco and Mobil and all these old oil companies who are still involved in those regions. And we just think, and good for bad, every once in a while I hear somebody says, like, America needs to pull back. And when I say that, I'm always like, when you say that, do you think Americans need to live on American soil? Or our deficit is so high that if American business and money didn't circulate around the world, we'd be at a real risk of being in some real trouble. But the reason why we still economically are considered the strongest country in the world is because those American businesses are everywhere. Joe Biden understood this, and he tried to start this program called the Build Back Better World program. And his whole idea was he presented this to NATO and other allies saying like, hey, if you don't pay attention, China is buying up and making deals in Africa and other parts of Asia that is making China what we are in most of the world. And the only way we're going to combat this is if Western allies and ourselves go to these countries and make some deals short term, we might lose, but in the long term, it's going to be very successful to us. And I think that was probably a decade too late. Obama had the same thing with the Trans-Pacific Partnership called the TPP, TIPI program. And I even think Donald Trump liked that program after the 2016 election. During the election, he thought it was a terrible idea, but right afterwards, he liked that idea.
Yeah.
But both parties had a hard time compromising what it was going to look like. And then Biden went back to it early in his term. And I don't think it actually passed because it's kind of like the Paris Climate Accord. Like some people in this country realize that this country has become great because we've made good allies throughout the world. Other people are saying like we shouldn't give other countries the ability to shut down the American machine. And I'm like, that's not what an alliance is. But yeah, I think that hurts us not being willing to make those deals and trying to counterbalance what China. And I'm not trying to say that China's a bad guy, but like as an American, I realize that the Chinese idea for business and economics versus the Americans are different. So in some ways, China is just a natural adversary. And some people say, well, competition is a good thing, but not when you're on the other team. Like, as much as I might complain about some of the way we do things in America, I still recognize I'm on Team America. So, like, I'm almost 45 this year, and I think I'll probably stay on this planet for another 40-ish years. But my name is going to be here for much longer, so I want the country to do as well as it can for as long as it can. And when I say that, then I say, like, well, then we need to look for partners who are going to help us to establish that.
It's definitely a difference from the standpoint of, I think, American businesses, they're in the business of making money. So they don't care what part of the world they're going to. If they can make money somewhere, they're going to go there. But I think other countries look at it from the standpoint of, they can make money, that's great, but they're more there for political Lego pieces that they can pick up to have a stronger foothold in this if they ever need something that way. Hey, we're going to do business with you, like you said in Africa, China is. Well, cool, that's great, that's awesome. But there's an undercurrent of, hey, because we have a good partnership, if we needed to put some Army troops here, can we do that? Yeah, because you have always been good to us. And opposed to American businesses, they don't look at it from the standpoint of, hey, I'm going to go to this country that we don't have partnerships with from American government side, but money side, they need it. Let's go there and let's get that money. And they don't see it.
Post-World War II, the Marshall Plan.
Yes.
So we're going to take American economics and democracy everywhere we go. So we are still trying to, Obama during the Arab Spring goes to Egypt and gives a speech. You know what, I want to slow because I'm not sure it was Egypt, but I know it was one of those countries that was involved in that Arab Spring. And he goes there and he talks about American capitalism, but also democracy. So I think that when American businesses go places, a lot of times it's with the support of the American government that the idea that capitalism and democracy go together because they're both built off of the idea of choice.
But do you think they go, and there's not a percentage, so it isn't like 70-30, but do you think they go there more with the eye on making money and secondarily as a democracy thing?
I think it's probably 50-50.
Okay.
Because when you think about, so if I'm Visa and I'm taking American cash and I'm opening up credit, I think the best thing to go with this is democracy because it brings choice. And with choice comes open more to more businesses.
Yeah.
So the only way democracy and capitalism can exist together is markets. So when I go into this place, my expectation is I'm going to open up markets so for ideas and free people and free money. So when I think of the Middle East and I think about America's success, of course I think of Saudi Arabia, but more so, I think of Dubai because Dubai is now a business vacation. Like it's like the number one destination. I didn't realize how many like Europeans go to Dubai for vacations. Like,
but yet though, in that same token, I can remember when they had the World Cup there many years ago, and it was just like, oh, the conditions were bad. They have like.
We're talking about Qatar or Dubai?
Qatar.
Yeah.
They had, bad things where they were just like, well, they have bad working conditions and blah, blah. And we didn't the Americans or the largest country, whoever it was, they didn't step in and be like, no, we need to stop that. And it's like, well, we're going to send our teams there when they need to be world-class facilities. And they looked the other way with all these, the ways they were being built and the way they were doing stuff. So I think countries sometimes can turn a blind eye to, we're all going to make money from the situation. Let's all do it, and then just look away from things.
Yeah, that's been the motto of the Olympics for a while now.
Yeah.
But Qatar just had the World Cup, and now the new announcement is Saudi Arabia is getting it. So Qatar did it well enough, made enough money for the sponsors, that now it's going. And as an American, it surprises me that Saudi Arabia is being chosen. But as you should talk to people who are Islamic about Saudi Arabia opening the door to the world next to Mecca and Medina, the two most holiest places in the Islamic world. Yeah. Like, to me, I mean, think about that. So you're talking about a place 50 years ago, women had to be covered head to toe. Now you're talking about soccer fans. Like, first of all, soccer. And I don't know if the Women's World Cup will be played there as well, but I know the Men's World Cup, which means you're probably going to have people in way less modest clothing. And there's no way you're going to be able to enforce a dress code where you're going to be able to tell women to cover up head to toe. That's just not going to happen. So it's just incredible to me to see how quick that's happened. And it's like the Qatar thing is interesting because then that World Cup happens, and then you get Israel and Gaza, and then you find out a big piece of Hamas's leadership lives in Qatar. So you just wonder, like, the leverage and the advantage of now having Qatar as like an ally on some point. Because Qatar has done, not just with the World Cup, but they've invested in other sports and schools and programs that have not just made Qatar money, but other people involved in it. So it's just interesting to see it happen in a very short time period.
Yeah, I'm surprised that other countries who have the ability to be a larger player in the world economy haven't, I don't want to say branded themselves, but haven't made their borders more available, or opened their borders up to be, to do more things, with that way. Because you would think after China and their great experience of having the 2008 Olympic Games that this is going to open the door to it, and it did to a certain extent, but it's not as free as what, other places that have had world events that have kind of sort of made themselves more amiable to it, like, Qatar did the World Cup. Now Saudi Arabia's going to get the World Cup. It's interesting how it slowly is blossoming out there. But China, after the...
No, they had Sochi.
Yeah, but that was in Russia.
I always think Sochi. Yeah. So
but I mean, it's
Beijing,
right on the base. Yeah, so
Sochi. Wasn't there another one?
They've been to Beijing. They had a Winter Games.
Wait.
Well, no.
Wait, is Sochi Russia?
Yeah, Sochi's that's in Russia. Yeah.
Wait, what was the one where Simone Biles had the mental health thing? That was Sochi.
That was Brazil, 2016.
No, that was 2020. She's old, but she ain't that old.
Let's see.
Tokyo, Japan.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Japan. So you can see that it's been in the East a couple of times.
Yeah, but I mean, Japan that's an ally of the United States.
And any of my Chinese, Japanese, Russian friends, I'm sorry for the bad geography there. I apologize because Beijing, Sochi, and Tokyo are very distinct, different places. But just rattling them off just now, I apologize. I hope that didn't come off as rude. But what the big problem with the Olympics is the debt. So now, I mean, Paris just had it, London had it, going back to LA, and a lot of those places has established facilities, so they'll have to build new things that waste a ton of money. I was just reading recently about the LA Olympics, how some of the events are going to be going on as far as Utah.
Yeah.
Because LA is just like, we don't have the money to build new infrastructure.
Yeah, I think I saw one of the places like Oklahoma or something.
Yeah.
Like whitewater rafting or something.
Yeah, like they are completely saying like, it's kind of like the World Cup coming up, whereas like Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And it's like, because we want to use our already existing infrastructure. I think the big lesson learned was Brazil that built a beautiful stadium in the middle of a rainforest. And then afterwards, they're like, we have no use for this venue anymore. Unlike China, who did the opposite. I hear all their venues are still being used. People, I mean, even during COVID, they're like, this is a place they use for some housing alternatives. So, I mean, I think it's about those countries having the flexibility to make money. And the only places that are going to be able to build new are those countries in like the Middle East who have excessive amounts of wealth. And they have power groups or authoritarian systems where you can say, I'm going to spend $4 billion out of my personal fund to build this. And Saudi Arabia, with things like the WWE and boxing events, have already shown that they can attract the world to their location and follow some of their rules. Not as many rules as we think of, but at least rules where their countries still seem to be ordered and not as chaotic.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense on how just you get one domino to fall in one little country or region of the world, it tends to open up other things and stuff. It's just you're interesting how some of those things just haven't yet and stuff with that way. You made a comment about doing 2024 being controversial or things that happen seem so far along. And it doesn't have to be the one thing, and what's a handful of things that have stuck out to you in your mind in 24 that have made it good, bad, or indifferent?
So I think that the constant changing world of streaming and entertainment. So we just recently saw football games on Christmas on a streaming service exclusively. And as a football fan, I noticed that, but that was not the most popular event on their streaming service. Their most popular event was the Tyson Jake Paul fight.
Yeah.
And so again, it makes me think like, what will broadcasting look like in a decade with these streaming services come along and starting to do so well in live events, especially?
Well, I mean, definitely Netflix was a test with the way that the Tyson Paul fight happened in November. That was awful. I mean, just had to reset the app 3 or 4 times to get it to work, and finally got it to stream. I didn't have nearly the buffering that other people did, and it worked fine for me. But it's
then
like
those football games the other day.
Yeah, I mean, they were seamless, knock on wood. I mean, they were okay, which, my household's a big wrestling fan, so they're excited about Netflix getting wrestling.
Yeah.
So it's like this was a good test to see. Now, granted, they're not going to pull the numbers that NFL games got, Netflix on Monday Night Raw when they do the wrestling stuff, but it's a good kind of sort of, tiptoe into the water that other businesses, will they start doing away from cable services or over the air and TV, will they start pulling away from that and doing a game exclusively? Because I remember a couple years ago when they were, hey guys, we're going to have this one playoff game, Dolphins Chiefs on Peacock, and then everybody threw a fit. I can't believe I don't have this, blah blah. And that was 2 years ago. That was a big
now
deal.
Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime is one of the highest ranked shows every week.
Yeah, so it's
bad games pull. Bears Seahawks last week 6-3. And it still ended up being like the 3rd or 4th highest program of the week. And it's just crazy. Somebody had told me, they said, college football, having everything on public broadcast is going to change. Well, then college football put it on TNT and Max. So last Saturday, college football rolling out their playoffs, they got annihilated by NFL regular season Saturday football. Wow. And I was like, man, that's interesting to see these streaming platforms, college football versus the NFL. I think college football is going to go away from TNT and Max and find a way to get it back on ESPN and ABC, maybe even a Peacock. Because I just think that I think college football's playoff is going to be interesting because I do think it will attract eyes. More football, the better. I think that's part of the American ethos.
But I mean, you stop and think, have they had better product by better teams playing in those games? You think that would have, I mean, they're never going to compete with the NFL because the NFL is king. But do you think it would have drawn eyes to those better teams if they had better games or opponents in those games?
So at peak, they said at peak at one point during that thing, there's 27 million people watching. What game do you think it was?
Last weekend?
On Wednesday, on Christmas.
It was probably the Chiefs one, I bet you, if I had to guess.
It was the Beyonce halftime show.
Really?
Yeah, because for Netflix, and I hear Netflix play Beyonce a bag.
Yeah, like $20 million is what I heard.
Yeah, but Netflix understood that having Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas, open it in the pageantry of Netflix, even with the commercials. And you got to remember, internationally, they didn't get commercials. They got Drew Brees is playing in football too. Yeah. So it's interesting how they went about the marketing on it. But they felt like, so neither one of those games were competitive.
Oh, no.
In fact, the second one, 31-2, and that was as close as the score indicated. That 2 was a safety on a play where I'm like, I don't even know if that's really a safety. But neither one of those games were competitive or fun to watch. But people still stuck around, partially because who was the competition?
Yeah, it was college football, and there wasn't any.
No, it was the NBA, and their best game.
Yeah, but their best game wasn't until 10:30 that
Warriors.
night. Yeah, and by that point, the NFL was done.
Over. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. But it was an interesting comment because I saw the end of that Warriors Golden State game, and LeBron said, "Hey, one thing, NFL, I love you. I watch it all the time, but Christmas Day's us."
And then 3 days later, the numbers came out and said NFL had 5 times as many viewers on a streaming service as the NBA, who had it on ABC.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, you look at days that always occur, like New Year's Day is always college bowl games. Now in the lexicon, the way we do it that way, President's Day or Groundhog's Day, Super Bowl, that's always falls around then in February. So it's just like, they have these days that are always given that way. Christmas Day has always been historically NBA games. And that's when, they always joke, the NBA season starts in September, but I don't pay attention until Christmas Day. That's when all the games start.
Yeah, but I think that the NFL this year tried Friday games. They had a game on every day but Tuesday this year.
Yeah, well, they had one on Black Friday.
Yeah, and they had the opening Brazil game.
Well, they had Thursday, and they had Friday game. That's the first Friday game.
So I think the NFL is getting more aggressive. And I think the only thing that's slowing them is right now all the injuries.
Well, you stop and think, this past week with Christmas, there was 2 games on Saturday, and then they had games slotted on Sunday, and then Monday night game, and then nothing Tuesday on Christmas Eve. Christmas had 2 games. They had a Thursday
had a game. Saturday had a game.
Had 2
Sunday
more
had
games.
games.
And Sunday had all the games.
And they probably won the ratings for programming those entire days NFL.
Yeah, so they probably had all the games every day but Tuesday.
So if you're Roger Goodell, and don't forget, they're about to roll out summer football. They're going to do it with women's flag football. It was on the NFL Network last year. ESPN and ABC are looking at putting it on TV, and it'll be NFL flag football. So, and you got to remember, the NBA started to push up against the NFL because the NBA started to get smart about doing year-round planning. So the finals would end, and then free agency and the draft will all happen, and it'll all be live on ESPN. But slowly but surely, the NFL is now saying, we're going to take more and more of that time. We're going to occupy you with the draft. We're going to put the combine in prime time. And now you have this monster. So the streaming thing, because I think all those programs you can put on the NFL Network, but if Amazon and Netflix are willing to pay you more money to make it a bigger, better production, they're going to do it. Because the NFL Network has some value, but they're not Netflix. Like that beyond, hey, I know my wife listens to this, and I like good entertainment. But Beyonce, at the halftime?
This sounds crazy. I was watching it more from the standpoint of who's going to come out, with all the drama that goes around, Jay-Z and all that stuff with that way. It's surprising to a certain extent that he didn't come out. If anything, make an appearance, but that's a side conversation. We'll leave that alone. But it's like, it was cool that she had Shabuzi. She had Post Malone come out there and
on her album she did this too. She had the Blackbird. Mm-hmm. The 4 singers with her are all African American country singers who are young in their careers, but she wanted to highlight and spotlight them. And then again, she used the HBCU bands. But the bigger lesson there was people said, why Beyonce? Because Netflix had already done a Beyonce special a couple years ago called Homecoming.
Yeah, and I think they put I saw on Netflix today, they had something like Beyonce Bowl, and I think they have the recap. You could watch the...
Yeah, so they already knew. Some people are like, man, the easy answer would have been at the Chiefs game to do Taylor Swift. But the NFL also understands, and maybe they're learning this because of Aaron Rodgers. You can have a cash cow that you milk too hard. So as much as they love Travis and Pat and the Chiefs stories, Taylor Swift, some of that is getting overdone. So they're like, you know what? We're in Houston for this game. Beyonce's from Houston. She has a country album. Let's give her that platform. Not like she needs the platform, but we know her. We have a relationship with her, and this is an easy win. So I think the streaming was a big story. I think this summer was a cool summer, the Olympics. And again, maybe this is where you can spotlight Peacock, basically running and organizing how NBC did the Olympics. So again, a streaming service playing a big role in that. But some great stories. I'll always think about the riflery guy and how casual and cool he was shooting, how everybody else took it like as a serious sport. But he really looked like a guy who went to the range after work twice a week and did shooting. So I thought that was a big one. I thought the summer of Kendrick Lamar. And I was telling I'm a big fan of a rapper / R&B guy named Childish Gambino. Gambino had basically 2 albums come out this summer, and Mr. Cooper appreciated both of them. But most people missed them because he happened to drop that right about the same time as Kendrick and Drake were heating up, so we missed it.
And that's unfortunate. He didn't even make the top 10. No, he did, yeah. I think he was 6th or 7th top 10 rapper of the year. I think Gambino they had in there. And it's sad because I heard he's doing away with that.
Well, so what he does, Childish Gambino is much more than just a rapper, musician, actor, comedian. He writes, he does a lot of stuff, but he is saying that the Childish Gambino period of his life is over. So I think the album, man, I always forget the name of the album, but the album that has the song Red Bone on it, it still sounds a lot like him. I think it's like Alive My Love or something like that. But I think that he wants to move on from maybe some of the comedy rapping stuff, which I actually really appreciate and like. And I don't know when you end an era as a musician, but yeah. But I think people miss that because of Kendrick and Drake. And I still think that Kendrick Drake thing and Kendrick getting the Super Bowl is still happening. But I think that took a lot of people's attention away from reality for a while there. It's crazy to me now when you're just casually walking around and Not Like Us is playing in public. And in some ways, it led to a Drake defamation lawsuit against his record label, and then a bigger lawsuit alleging some things going on with streaming that I think, again, makes it a much bigger story. But, man, could you imagine the whole world chanting you're a pedophile? Like, oh, man. Like, the Drake anger. Legitimately, I would sue people too. But at the same time, it didn't feel right in the middle of a hip-hop battle.
Yeah. I mean, just, going back here and looking at, like, the recap of all this stuff, I mean, you completely forget about, like, in January, with all the anti-Semitic stuff, with the Harvard president retiring, being forced out, and she resigned and stuff with it that way.
Why do you think that is? Like, so we had between Palestinian supporters and Jewish groups and Jewish supported group on college campuses for about 4 months at the end of last year, beginning of this year. That really heated up, and then the election came around.
I'm telling you, man, I think it's done as a way to keep people engaged. It's like red meat for people. They see that, they get infuriated. Two things. Either they get so tired of it, they put their hands up and be like, oh, you know what, I'm going to put my head in the dirt. I don't want to watch it. Or you get people who then all of a sudden get fired up and they're like, I'm going to go vote. I'm going to go make my voice be heard. I'm going to change stuff with that way. And it's never a good base. It's so wildly swung in one direction. I think the people who wanted to vote for change got out there and they did it that way, and that was a big deal. Because you're right, after January, I didn't hear any more about all the college campus and things that way. I'm sure it's probably out there and stuff, but is it because of the news cycle we live in there, it was 24-hour news cycle, that was hour 1, and now we're in hour 20, so they moved on from that?
Yeah, I mean, well, the time I really heard it re-flare up was right around the election when some of those same groups were like, we're not voting for Harris because of her support of Israel. And there are people who are like, we're either going to stay home. And then Dearborn, Michigan became the big story, where in the end, Trump either won or really, really cutting that lead so much that it might have cost Harris Michigan. And then post the election, to hear some of those people say like, well, maybe we should have voted for her. But then in quick retrospect, you think like 2020, we had that movement too, but it was Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. And in some ways, that probably spurred Biden into a victory, where in this one, it probably in some ways cost the election for Harris. Because it was like you have these two big things occurring. And I think the one thing that the right was really good at was like you said, getting views on defunding the police. So you have that one Democratic candidate in a very liberal state talking about defunding the police, and then you'd have Joe Biden as the presidential candidate being like, oh, no, I support the police. So it was very, very believable that those people were more the liberals on the outskirt and Joe Biden was more of the Democratic consensus. Whereas this time with Harris, and again, it probably goes into the fact that she only had 100 days to basically present herself to Americans.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know about the Republican Party, even though I think they'll do a better job with selling J.D. Vance than the Democrats ever did with selling Harris as a VP. But I do think that we might be going back into a traditional cycle of the VP doing more to be out there to set them up as the flag bearer for the party. where I think the lesson from this one was, as much as some people knew about Harris, there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party who were still very uncomfortable with her and her policies. And she had 4 years as the vice president to put herself on a platform. And what ended up happening is Donald Trump was able to cast her in the light as the borders are, where then Joe Biden and his administration would have to respond and say, oh, Kamala Harris worked on that, but she wasn't in charge of the border, so much that people are like, well, then what was she in charge of? And again, there's nothing that they can come out so strongly and say, she did this, this is why she should be president. So she ends up running on a platform where her and Donald Trump were voting for change, Donald Trump legitimately being the non-incumbent. That's his position versus Harris, who's like, I wouldn't have done anything different than Joe Biden, but I'm still a different type of candidate. And I just don't think people bought that.
I mean, even just going back and like the assassination attempt of Trump, that was in July. It was the middle of the year, and how that was a big deal. And now that's just kind of gone to the wayside. Even the second attempt, supposedly, that was done down in Florida, that kind of sort of came and went. As soon as the election cycle was done, they moved on. I mean, it's just...
Kind of they moved on. Trump has now put out a cologne called Fight, Fight, Fight. And my favorite part about this is when they were reopening Notre Dame Cathedral, Jill Biden gave him a side hug. So the ad for that cologne was Fight, Fight, Fight. Cologne that smells so good, even the adversary wants you. And I'm just like, man. I mean, somebody told me Kamala Harris, even if she would have had a year to present herself, that Donald Trump was so strong as a candidate that it didn't matter who the Democrats ran. And I'm like, some ways, man, when Donald Trump emerged from underneath that podium or that stand with the blood dripping from his ear, putting his fist up and the crowd chanting, fight, 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 I've seen fantastic movies. I don't know if there was a better movie moment. Like if you, and again, I'm being 100% sincere. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm not trying to say it was fabricated. But if you'd have shown me that clip and told me, Mr. Cooper, that wasn't real, that was from a movie, I'd be like, man, that's a great movie.
That's where they didn't wag the dog.
Yeah, I mean, Efren, this is my suggestion for right now. So we have a great podcast that's going on. Mm-hmm. So we should stop this podcast right now and do a part 2 where we continue the conversation. So we split it up a little bit.
That works for me. We can do that way. Well, here, because I always like ending with a lyric. This one, because it was stuck in my head as I was riding over to podcast here with Coop today. If this world was mine, I'd take your dreams and make them multiply. If the world was mine, I'd take your enemies in front of God. From Luther, Kendrick Lamar.
Jeez.
That's a great one there. It just stuck in my mind about, the dreams, let's multiply it that way. I like the advice here. We'll stop here on this one and we'll pick back up on the recap of 2024 next time. With you always, my name is Efren, and with me always is my trusty co-host,
Coop. Thanks, guys, for hanging out. See you in 2025.